Thank you for joining us here today for our afternoon plenary session of the Academic Festival 2012, Rewiring the Learning Landscape. We hope you were with us this morning when President Furman and I presented our next speaker with the President's Medal of Excellence for his achievements and work in the field of education technology. Matthew Pittinsky is quite literally rewiring the education landscape. I can't help but notice many young faces here today, so I can only imagine that a large percentage of you have firsthand knowledge and experience using some of the platforms that Matthew has played a part in developing. Blackboard is a pioneering e-learning company that he co-founded in 1997. He served as the first chief executive officer and then as executive chairman. Blackboard now has 7 platforms and has an impact on tens of millions of students and users on a daily basis. The platforms are used in almost 200 countries worldwide, having an impact on millions upon millions of people. For example, Blackboard Analytics is leveraged by over 100 higher education institutions. Blackboard Connect has delivered billions of messages with over 800 million alone in 2010. Blackboard Transact sees over 17 billion student transactions per year. And Blackboard Learn has over 200 partners and 20 million daily users. Matthew left Blackboard in 2008 to teach and conduct research as an assistant professor of sociology in Arizona State University's School of Social and Family Dynamics. He remains a research assistant professor at ASU with specializations in economic sociology, sociology of education, and social network analysis. Matthew joined Parchment Incorporated, an education data company, in 2011 as CEO. He leads all facets of their mission to unleash education credentials by unlocking the critical data they embody. Parchment's network of senders and receivers is the leading education credentials exchange system of its kind in the world. 6 state education agencies, nearly 9,000 schools and universities, and hundreds of thousands of individuals trust and rely on the DocuFied platform to transform and deliver millions of transcripts and other student records every year. Matthew brings a unique background to the industry, and he embodies both an education technology entrepreneur and a sociologist of education. Please help me in welcoming Matthew Pittinsky.
Thank you. So as the day has gone on, I have felt 2 sort of concurrent forces. One is expectations for the session have gone up, and as a function of all the other award winners and speakers, my own sense of competency has gone down. So I feel very lucky that we ended up in the forum that we're going to shift to in a moment, which is more of a discussion. I didn't want to kind of do a sage on the stage giving a talk, although I will make some introductory comments. But Tom's prepared some questions for me about, not to cheat, entrepreneurship, I'm guessing, technology, and education. But those are the 3 topics, and hopefully this will be a broader discussion too. I've met people today who are interested in starting companies in education, so I'd love to talk about the business and entrepreneurship side. For those who are interested, obviously it's always amazing to talk to people who use Blackboard or other learning technologies, and so I'm also excited to talk about practice too. But in terms of introductory comments, one of my favorite quotes is from Thoreau. He once said that all of our inventions are but improved means to unimproved ends. And so the thing that I kind of learned and took away from first the Harvard Ed School and then Teachers College in the doctoral program is the importance of focusing on the ends. You're grounded in it when you learn with teachers and school leaders, and you appreciate it when you sort of realize just how big and daunting the triple challenges of improving access in education, which is still so critical in the US, but certainly the global supply and demand imbalance around education is tremendous. The importance of improving the quality of education And we typically think about that from a K-12 perspective, but when we look at attrition and dropout rates in post-secondary, which is where the policy context is focused increasingly now, it becomes critically important there as well. And then the third, because we live in a world of limited resources, improving the efficiency of education. So you have the quality, access, and efficiency as these big long-term trends in terms of challenges that we're seeking to improve with education. And while I don't believe that technology is sort of the panacea, it's ultimately how it's used. I think when you think about the three big technologies that are changing in education, so I'd ask you to sort of imagine a matrix. And there are three rows. One of them is access, efficiency, and quality, which are the ends. And then there are the three means that I think are the three big technology trends. The first, the one that Blackboard wrote initially, is the network. The wireless network, the wireline network, the global network. The fact that we are interconnected through IP, through networks, is just such a big idea. It breaks down the barriers of time and of place. And you hear the examples, as we heard Professor Sachs this morning, of the 8 o'clock session where participants from all over the world are participating in the same educational experience. We're just at the beginning of thinking about the impacts of networks. And so Blackboard was an example of that, of bringing education online, either to add a third dimension to the traditional classroom. You still go twice a week to your course, or should go twice a week to your course. But then you have the ability to upload your assignments, check your grades online. That was the original incarnation of Blackboard. And then obviously growing into distance learning. And now we see the notion of Benchmark Capital, a prestigious Silicon Valley firm, announced just a few weeks ago a $25 million seed stage, largest seed stage investment in their history, $25 million to create the Minerva project, which they very grandiosely announced as the first Ivy League institution to open in the last 150 years. And it's a completely online program that's going to aggregate content from lots of different places. And so I think the network is just in the beginning of impacting the disaggregation and reaggregation and the asynchronous nature of education. And that obviously impacts access. I think it can impact efficiency and quality too. Certainly efficiency in breaking down the cost structure of education. The second big technology is multimedia. And by that I mean we just have an ability to teach things in a way that we never could have before. It's the electoral politics simulation that show you how just 100 votes in one particular county can change the outcome of an election. It's the virtual dissection of a frog, which is a boon to many, many people who hated dissecting the real frog, but also allows you to, as Professor Furman or President Furman talks about, every click is being tracked in that dissection to really understand the kinds of competencies that are being developed and where we need to step in. The ability to explore the galaxy, or the ability to explore history. And we have an ability to teach concepts in a fundamentally different way, and it's almost criminal to think that the majority of educational experiences are still based on textbooks and live lectures in classrooms, when there's such an ability to immerse people and engage them and track student learning in a way that we never could have before. And that obviously impacts quality, and I think it also impacts efficiency as well. And then the third, which is the one that I'm sort of passionate about now, is data. And you hear over and over again about big data. But the funny thing about blackboards and live classrooms is we have this amazing instructional experience for 45 minutes or an hour, and then it goes away. The blackboard is wiped out, students leave, the questions are gone forever, the lecture is gone forever. But as technology increasingly plays a role in the delivery of education, all of that data stays. All of what people understood and did understand. Learning that students who take course B before course A actually do better than if you take course A before course B. Or students from Baldwin High School that take course B before course A do better, but students from Massapequa High School don't in terms of math preparation. That understanding how many years of math you've taken as a high school student and your performance actually helps place you into first-year math courses. It's sort of odd that we would forget all of this information we learn about an applicant in the admissions process when they become a student and actually go through the learning process. As a faculty member, this will scare some people, but I was involved in a project where we took card swipe data and inferred friendships among students. We actually did remarkably well figuring out who was friends with whom using anonymous data about two people swiping within 5 seconds of one another, frequently at different times of the day in different contexts. And from that, you could imagine if someone hasn't socially integrated on campus, they're at risk of dropping out. We know that if a friend drops out, it normalizes, increases the risk that I'll drop out. It also is a little bit scary to think that we were inferring friendships from everyone from their card swipe data. So that's not one that I'm necessarily suggesting in a practical sense. But the potential of data, of big data, is so tremendous for personalizing educational experiences, creating feedback loops from K through 12 to post-secondary. There are small and big ideas there as well. And so what kind of gets me excited, not that technology is the universal solvent, but what gets me excited is that there are these three big sort of ends, these three big challenges in education: quality, efficiency, and access. And we have three transformative technologies: the network, multimedia, and data. And when you build out that matrix, even if you're not sort of an entrepreneur by nature, immediately your mind will race to each of those cells and the 100 ideas that exist in those cells, small and big, that I think can play a role within education. You know, my academic background is in sociology, and so I ultimately taught in a sociology program. I didn't do much around technology, actually. When I was here, I just sort of hit away and went through a fairly traditional program. But I wanted to be part of the TC community, because that matrix at the end of the day only will be realized not by entrepreneurs, but by practitioners, by the teachers and the school leaders who can think about the technologies that they can create internally and the policies and the practices they can implement internally to use what's happening in the marketplace and bring it to work. So to learn, and now this is called a segue, to participate in a discussion with practitioners, who I feel like, not everyone here is a practitioner, I know. There are other forms, but most people are practitioners, is why I came to DC. It made the experience much richer, and it's why I'm very honored to have a chance to be put to the test in a discussion with Tom and everyone else here about entrepreneurship, technology, and education. So thank you very much.
I'm going to begin by asking a question that Bradley Battaglia passed along. And it really, in a sense, while the matrix is still lingering in our minds that you just described, let's ask the question of what do you anticipate will be the role of brick and mortar schools 20 years from now, of which we are one here.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. So let me first say, a lot of people don't like Blackboard, and it's fine if you don't like Blackboard. So when you're thinking of questions, don't hesitate to be challenging. I want to put sort of the elephant in the room. I like Blackboard, but so first, I studied sociology of education. I believe education is a social process. And one of the things that concerns me about the direction of online education, and this isn't just the for-profit education space, this is very, very much happening in the not-for-profit space, is the way that traditional terminology in education are being abused in kind of an online context. So a web page with a PowerPoint is called a course. That's not a course. A course, has an expert faculty member or teacher, whatever role they're playing, guide on the side or sage on the stage. And it's a social experience in terms of other people being part of it. And then obviously there are the resources as well. And so I chose, long after Blackboard existed, to come to a physical brick and mortar place to learn. My children will as well. And I really think it's around, so I think there's a vibrant future for brick and mortar. I'm not someone who subscribes to the view that, I think Trucker or someone announced that 80% of colleges were going to go out of business in the next, 30 years. I think that's silly. First off, I think it dramatically underestimates the cultural role of schools and universities. It's sort of like saying the internet's transforming the church. I think the school and the university is more like the church than like Amazon or Barnes & Noble. But also because I just think there are elements of the educational experience that are uniquely suited to being in a place together, interacting in a live classroom session with the benefit of presence. But it is going to be highly augmented. I would be beyond frustrated and disappointed if my children don't go to a college where they're taking some amount of courses from other institutions, because no institution can provide it all. I'd be highly frustrated if their faculty member had colleagues all over the world and was teaching those articles and didn't have those colleagues participate in the lecture when they're teaching those articles. So I'd be highly frustrated if a big part of their experience wasn't online, but I think there's a dramatic need for home base, and I think colleges are home base.
So this next question really goes to the quality of Teachers College, where we're a place that combines education, psychology, and health. And we're thinking about the whole person. We're thinking much more broadly and deeply about well-being than just a narrowly focused view of education. And this question is from Mercedes del Rosario. And she asks, how can we create an equilibrium between the fast-paced life boosted by technology and our organic, human, slower pace so that we can have a healthier life and increased peace of mind?
Yeah. No, I think when we think about sort of the earliest days of the web, or I do, I'm starting to feel a little bit old, but in 1996 or 1995, you'd log into a web page, and there would be these animated things. There'd be like a dancing monkey, and there'd be lights flashing, and you could tell that someone was really proud to have learned HTML. And they wanted to show everything it can do. And now I think we appreciate sort of the benefit of simple design, and we benefit. I mean, look at Facebook. Facebook, I think, losing its ways. But the initial sort of hit of Facebook was just an obscenely simple design. And that's, I think, the genius of Mark Zuckerberg. And you think of Apple, obviously, it's easy and cliche to say to appreciate simple design. And I think we're going through something similar with online learning. That more is more right now, and we have to get to less is more. But to make that happen, learning sciences has to be at the center of instructional design. And too often, because it's expensive, institutions are throwing stuff up on the web, and they're not really providing the kind of consultation to faculty, and they're not creating the centralized resources that would bring learning sciences in to say, yeah, it may be really interesting to throw up that movie here or to do this there, but what are you really trying to teach, and what's the best way to accomplish it? So I think as we become more grounded in learning sciences, it was one thing that I could graduate, this will now be critical at TC, that I could graduate from Teachers College to go on and be a professor without ever having to learn how to teach, right? That's one of the knocks on university faculty. As part of your doctoral program isn't necessarily teaching, it's the research. In a traditional classroom environment, we've all experienced the ups and downs of that. In an online environment, you have to be grounded in learning sciences if you're going to be responsible for helping to develop and even to teach an online course. And that's a big challenge for TC. You described sort of a view of Teachers College where we have the health, we obviously have the traditional education development programs, we have cognition and psychology, and the view was that to do education well, you needed to have that complete picture. Well, I would submit that you now need to have the technical picture. There need to be computer science faculty at TC. There need to be people who really are not afraid of quantitative components of education, data analysis. All of that stuff is going to be the fabric of being a teacher and a school leader. And that's kind of the piece that's just coming online now in the practice.
System dynamics is about understanding complexity and decision making, which is what education is about, making decisions for your life, for your business, for your schools. And it is basically learner oriented. The teacher is only a facilitator.
Right.
No lectures. Now, it's not relevant for language. It is relevant for math, science, and in a great many ways, history. What would have happened if Napoleon had turned left instead of right?
Right.
And I don't see it. It's in quite a few schools in Massachusetts. It may be 150 schools in the United States, over 1,000 in China. It's a wonder they're getting ahead of us.
Yeah.
By the way, they've transferred the method of doing the computer modeling, the whole thing, into Chinese. So we're falling behind. My first life, I was in the children's apparel business. So I've been focusing on education since then. And I had 3 products everybody had to have: the Roy Rogers license, the Snoopy license, and the Superman license. Now, if you could have a business like that, and you could get the mothers to pay any price for the profit product, which they won't for kids wear.
So you're hitting on a really, really important topic. If you, last week, actually in Arizona of all places, not to put down my hometown now, there is this sort of national event that happens every year. It's almost like a finance industry technology conference around education. It's called the Education Innovation Summit. So you have all the big venture capitalists, big companies like Pearson and Blackboard, and the other publishers, and then you have sort of startups. Without question, the single biggest area of entrepreneurship and capital is in curriculum products that are somehow around adaptive and personalized learning. That is where the action, companies like Newton, companies like Dreambox, obviously the big publishers like Pearson and My Math Lab. And so there's a tremendous amount of capital and excitement going into How can we teach things in a way where every click of the instructional experience is feeding back, and there are these assessments, and if you don't understand it, you go back to the beginning again, and pathways and branching, all of that good stuff. The challenge is, how many teachers have experience teaching a classroom where there are 5 pods, right? And those 5, I mean, it's not Schools Without Walls. Is it Schools Without Walls in New York City? Joel Rose's program? Does anyone know it? School of One, thank you. It's School of One in New York City. Joel Rose's program is the model of that future world, where in School of One you go in, all the walls have been taken down in the classrooms. There are different pods, and every day up on the big monitor is the list of every student's name and the pod that they're going to that day, based on how they assessed at the end of the prior day. And that's sort of uber personalization. But again, it comes back, I think, to this big challenge for Teachers College and other schools of education, is how do we develop practitioners? I mean, there are some technical problems, right? You have 10 curriculum products like that. They each have different logins. They each have different account names. There's no then centralized hub for how that data gets aggregated, where the effectiveness of these products can be compared. I don't mean to get into the weeds, but there actually are some infrastructure issues in imagining that world, and School of One is experiencing that. But how do we develop practitioners who understand that mode of teaching, that's part of their practicum? And that's the new frontier to catch up on.
Let's take another question so we give some other people a chance.
One thing that concerns me is the word parent has not come up. I've heard about what we need to do for the practitioners, teacher training, et cetera, et cetera. In your schema of how this would work in an ideal situation, where do parents come in this process? How are they engaged? Are they engaged after the teachers gain facility with the technology and the programs? Is it concurrent? Are they part of the creation process? Where do you see them fitting in? As we all know, they're a critical part of the education process.
Yeah, so now I feel bad I didn't find a way to mention parents. Well, I think I said I was. So I think in a couple of ways. First off, the secret of Blackboard's success is really 2 things. One is we always sort of criticize these quote-unquote Luddite faculty, Luddite teachers. That was absolutely not our experience, right? You made it obscenely easy, and you could argue whether Blackboard is obscenely easy today. But back then, Blackboard was obscenely easy for a teacher to create an online course, and they wanted to. It may have been to solve a very simple administrivia type problem, like distribution of lecture notes, handing in assignments online, online assessments so that they grade automatically, for less critical aspects of the course. But they led the way. And that was true in higher education. In K-12, it was the parents. Parents would say, why can't I? And now list any 30 elements of their life with every kind of institution they interact with, except maybe their doctor's office. And they would ask why I can't do that with the school. Why don't I know, what the homework is tomorrow? Why can't I access, what my child submitted and what your comments are on it? Why can't I see the discussion? How do I get involved in the instruction? So I think parents are very powerful change agents in that way. I think the challenge for parents will be, and it gets back to kind of the learning sciences notion. Yeah, my oldest daughter is going to go into kindergarten, and so I had to do the dreaded kindergarten tour. And Arizona is a very big choice state, so the assumption isn't you go to your local community school; it's that you shop. And the social pressure, at least among the people that we're with, is that you shop. And our presumption was we go to the local community school unless there was something wrong with it, quote unquote. And so everyone thought we were horrible parents because we didn't visit a ton of different schools. But going into that school, I realized how completely incompetent I was to evaluate the school. I have no idea if it's a good school. Unless I actually sat in and saw the kindergarten teacher teach 3 to 4 classes, right? And then saw the 4th grade teacher do it, and then saw the 6th grade teacher do it, how would I ever in the tour understand if it's a good school or not? Because it depends on the teacher that my daughter has, all of those other kinds of issues associated with it. And I realized just how uninformed I am, and I'd like to think, I've had some experience in education. So it's the same thing with technology. Parents bring in, and this I'm explaining now because I haven't been in that position, although there are helicopter parents when you're a faculty member in college, you'd be shocked to discover. Parents bring in teachers, tell me, an expectation for what the instructional technology environment is going to be like that is equivalent to Facebook and Chase and Amazon.com. And to our comment earlier, that's not always the best thing from a learning sciences perspective. And so now you have this tension. I always think of the smartboard example. Every school now has smartboards so that they could put PowerPoints up and write on them, right? But parents, if I saw a smartboard, I'd be like, they get it. This school is, focused on technology. So parents are change agents, and the challenge is going to be, how do we make sure that parents create the right incentives rather than the wrong incentives? Because the wrong incentives would mean spending a lot of money, very rare money in education, and this is where the whole question of the cost-benefit of technology in education comes from, to dress things up that don't necessarily have kind of a measurable long-term improvement on educational outcomes. And I fear there's a lot of sizzle in instructional technology, not to put smartboards down because they can be used well, that's more about satisfying that consumer sort of interest of parents. So I apologize for the long answer, but that's kind of how I think about it. They are change agents, and so how do we make them informed change agents when realizing it's hard to be informed as a parent on almost anything in education, right? Because we're years ago when we went through it and so much has changed.
It seems to me that we've talked about technology, we've talked about instructional formats, and yet we haven't really talked about the big question, which is, when are we going to fire the teachers? Now that sounds like I'm a heretic here because I'm sitting in the middle of teachers' college. So, God, I got to get out of here. But the reality is, what are the processes that we can work with to help our educators change themselves? In other words, as an example, I have a student in an on-ground class that I'm working with, and I also blend in some online materials and questions, and he came back to me with an answer to a question that was well outside the scope of the course. Now, the good news is I was able to go out and do some research, and I could actually sound intelligent back to him. But more and more, I think, our educators, our teachers, are going to be faced with content that's coming from a much broader realm than they've had exposure to. So how do we change the educator to deal with that issue? With technology aside, the technology comes and goes. It's always going to be changing. But how do we create a better or a newer educator model?
Right. So first part of the question I'm going to stay away from. And I think you sort of clarified yourself in the second and third, which is it's more about transforming the teacher. And it gets back, I think, to, I will always pick on Teachers College because we're here, but how does Teacher College conceive of the way in which it prepares teachers in that environment where students and their families are going to have access to information and are going to come back and challenge. And much of the educational experience, and this is a new area of digital divide, I also would be shocked. I said I'd be shocked if my child in college didn't have some meaningful amount of their education come from outside of the walls. I'd be shocked if that's not true during K-12. I'd be shocked, and I'm someone who has a very conservative view of the time scale of change in education, but I would be surprised if my soon-to-be kindergartner by 6th or 7th grade isn't having some amount of the instruction. I mean, by the time she gets to high school, she certainly will take an AP course or two if she shows interest in it from outside of the high school that we physically will attend. I'm guessing during the summer, I'm hoping during the summer she'll have some enrichment online. She'll probably take test prep online. So more and more of their educational experience is going to be through other teachers concurrent with the core experience of the traditional kind of K through 12 experience and the resources they're going to have access to. And so I think it really becomes the redefinition of a teacher's role in an information-rich world. How do you help students process that information and organize it around curriculum themes that are building, a set of skills and a body of knowledge in a particular area? And it's empowering them to be learners as opposed to simply, taking in that information. I know I'm talking in broad strokes. In terms of the very practical how, this may not be the most attractive answer, but I think it's time. I think it's just going to take time as the profession evolves and as new teachers come in and as they come through new programs. But if there's the greatest risk to that is in schools of education. Are they going to make the rapid pace? My guess is most schools of education are still preparing the teachers that eventually need to evolve out of the system as opposed to preparing the teachers that are perfectly adept for the new system. I know that sounds like a critical thing to say, but it's at least my experience visiting schools of ed when I was at Blackboard and seeing how they use systems like Blackboard.
My question is, how can entrepreneurship and technology mitigate and or exacerbate the impact of student socioeconomic status? In other words, what are you going to do? What does this mean for the 20% children who are, as we were told this morning, who are in poverty, and schools where, you know, everybody's parent doesn't have an iPhone or an iPad or access to technology?
Right. These are all really big questions. I hope no one thinks I actually have the answer to these questions. But I can at least mention
Right,
some,
you can say some things. Right.
I can do some things to kind of stimulate. Einstein once said that there are only 5 people in the world who truly understood his theory of relativity, and he wasn't one of them. And I'm feeling like that right now. So let me first say that I do think mobile technology is kind of a big thing. And people underestimate across socioeconomic, and I mean, actually, we talked about this morning in terms of access to cell phones in Africa. So you may or may not be surprised by just how broad-based adoption of smartphones is and the technical literacy. So I'm not sure that's the case. Sometimes, and Gates is, hopefully there's no one from the Gates Foundation, but Gates Foundation is kind of big about that there are these fundamentally missing skills and technologies and hardware platforms, and so to focus on technology as a way of closing the gap, you're just exasperating it because there isn't the access. And I think that's not quite the case. I think you'd be pretty surprised at the access to technology and the literacy of technology across the socioeconomic spectrum. You know, that said, how can it close it? I'd like to think my current company, Parchment, plays a role in that. So if you upload your transcript to parchment.com, we'll tell you not only what are your chances of getting into a particular college, but how those chances change if you take a 4th year of band versus 6 AP course. We'll give you the 20 schedules or transcripts that maximize your chances. We'll do all sorts of stuff that if you look at the inequity in guidance and access to guidance across the country, begins to democratize through data, the kinds of tools that address the undermatching problem, as well as helping to create a more concrete sense of the actions you're taking as a freshman or sophomore to the aspirations that you have. There's no shortage of aspirations. What there's shortage of is pathways to realizing those aspirations. So I think that's an example where it can close. Obviously, an area where it can expand is, you know, I talked about the, I think literally hundreds of millions of dollars that are going into adaptive learning products. You know, those are expensive. And I think that there is, while there are forces like Gates and federal funds, you know, right now my guess is that the typical student using one of these more sophisticated kinds of curriculum products is in the upper SES spectrum as opposed to the lower SES. And that's where then, you know, we see the potential to divide. So I think that's a real dynamic with any new technology, is who gets it and when.
A couple of years ago, Larry Cuban had a book out called Oversold and Underused. And one of the essential premise of that is that computers and education, and basically it's all about generating a better sense of efficiency in learning and improving the ability to do procedural tasks more efficiently, rather than actually transforming the learning process. And I was wondering if you feel that the goal of education, particularly at the K-12 level, is to transform the learning process as often has been claimed, or is it really more in the efficiency realm? Thank you.
That's a great question. So let me first say that sort of book infuriates me. And you feel like there's this, I don't really ever get angry, so it doesn't literally infuriate me, but metaphorically infuriates me. And it's because you feel sometimes, and I don't want to be critical of my colleagues, because I did spend 2 years as an academic, you know, that people who study education are almost, it's almost an industrial complex to focus on what's not working as opposed to what is working, and to make the problem always intractable as opposed to tractable, because it's a full occupation sort of, full employment license, as long as we never fix the problem, and I don't ever pretend we will quote unquote fix the problem, because we should then just raise the bar. So there should always be a problem. But it's this constant sort of, small classrooms, I do a study and small classrooms don't work. But of course, what are you doing in those classrooms? If you're just, when I was at the ed school, I remember Dick Elmore giving this wonderful example of how he was doing some site-based research in a classroom. And they had extended the fewer periods in a day, each one longer. I'll get to the answer to your question. Each one longer. So maybe it's 90 minutes instead of 45 minutes for a class. And so she asked the teacher, what do you think about a longer class period? And the teacher said, I think it's fantastic. And he said, wow, can you tell me why? And she goes, because now I can show the entire film. It's a true story, according to him. Mm-hmm. So think about that. She was just taking the film in half sessions and now showing the whole film. Mm-hmm. Well, of course that's not going to improve educational outcomes. It's what you do with it. Of course small classes don't do, if you're just sitting up there and treating people as anonymously as ever, but intuitively, if you have more time with the individual students, if you can understand them better, the lower ratio, there's got to be good out of it, but you have to sort of adjust the curriculum accordingly. The segue to your question, which I think is the perfect way to phrase it, because their work often is about sort of the dubious nature of investing in technology and education, because it's not driving the outcomes that we think when we control for all the things that we should control for. But of course, it's what are you doing with it? If I'm just doing PowerPoint slides instead of overhead, as Dr. Sachs talks about, well, then of course it's not going to improve educational outcomes. But if parents can find out what their student has to do the next day, and play a role, if there are these curriculum products that are giving you sort of personalized learning path, there's plenty of research to demonstrate that it does. And the reason why we're in the situation that we're in is exactly what you described and what they do describe in the book, which is that the driver initially is efficiency. It's Blackboard to create a class website because then we don't have to spend as much money on X, Y, and Z. But that class website is then just a PowerPoint uploaded, right? It's not really driving anything that's going to really drive education. So I do think the major drivers of technology, unfortunately, are efficiency, but that's not unlike corporate America. The first major wave of ERP technologies were about processing payroll and doing finance differently. And what are they now about? Customer relationship management, allowing Target to find out that someone is pregnant before they even know, or their parents even know they're pregnant, based on analyzing, if you read the New York Times Magazine article, analyzing clusters of products. Why are diapers and beer near each other? This is the classic example. It's because typically it's dads at 2 in the morning that have to go get diapers, and they also like to buy beer. That's sort of the example. And you'll notice diapers and beer are near each other in the front of Target and Walmart. And so corporations went through this same stage of focusing on the back office and then moving to the front office. We started Blackboard because we were management consultants at KPMG for 2 years. We didn't really know anything. And we noticed universities spending millions of dollars on PeopleSoft and Oracle and SunGard and DataTel. These are run the business kinds of systems, when they were also wiring up the dorms and the classrooms, and there was no software to make it easy for a teacher to create an online course. That seemed absurd. That was the point of the institution. So yes, it is true that they focus on technology for efficiency, but it's also true, so does everyone else, and it evolves over time. And where the focus should not be is technology in some abstract sense, but best practice in technology. And then I think we can make some progress.
We've come to the end of our allotted time, so I'm going to ask you to take all of the energy in these questions that remain and carry them both into conversation as we mingle and move to our next segment of the program, and take them into the sessions this afternoon. We have breakout sessions. The locations are in your guide there. And please join me in thanking Matthew Pittinsky for this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.